Hello and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Before this episode starts, I just wanted to thank you, the listener, for the continued support you've shown the Market Bull podcast so far. Since we started the show, there's been overwhelmingly positive feedback, and it's just been an incredible journey. We have great plans to further develop the show, so thank you for taking the time to listen to me each week. If I can ask one favour of you, it's to please hit the follow button and review the show on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Today on the show, I spoke with Dean Tuck, the Managing Director at Dreadnought Resources, which is an exploration company listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under code DRE. Dean started the conversation by discussing his origin story in the mining sector and how his career has developed to where it is now as the Managing Director at the company. Dean explained the current outlook for rare earths and broke down what the key components are of these commodities. We looked at the current global supply and why an increase in exploration and mine development is required to address the global demand. Dreadnought has 4 projects currently underway, and Dean gave an update on how they are progressing, the key milestones, and what he finds exciting about each of the projects. Dean loves getting his hands in the dirt, and this was clear in the way the company is developing and its culture. If you're looking for a better understanding of what rare earths are, this episode will be perfect for you. So hello and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. I'm your host, Ben Kostrich, and joining me on the show today is Dean Tuck, the Managing Director at Dreadnought Resources, which is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under code DRE. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Cheers, Ben. Great to be here.
For those of you that don't know Dreadnought, or more importantly yourself, how did you start getting yourself into this mining industry, and a bit of background about where you even came from? Because I detect an accent already.
That's right. So I came from Texas. Texas is oil and gas capital of the world, like Perth's mining capital. And oil and gas was ever my cup of tea. And I got an opportunity to come over here in 2007. I could spell rock, had a pulse, got asked to head out with Talisman Mining in the early days to sit on a drill rig, and quickly realized that working out bush and sitting on a rig was a dream job. Getting paid to go camping, 4-wheel driving. Came from a geology background. My mom's a geologist. My grandfather was a prospector. My uncle's a petroleum engineer and geologist. So it was something that's always in the blood. And to get exposed to mining for the first time here in Australia really opened my eyes to what would become my ideal career.
So almost bread and butter running through the family. You were almost determined or dead set going to be a miner no matter what. And I mean, moving to Australia, I can imagine there'd be quite a lot of differences initially, but how did you find just immersing yourself in Australia and, as you said, the bush bash and the camping lifestyle? How did you find that initially?
Well, once I got over the two cultures being separated by a common language and actually being able to understand the Australians and them understand me, it was fantastic. Texas and WA, I think, have a lot in common, being resource-rich states that want to be countries within their own country.
Yep.
And so I think it was a bit of a natural fit being over here. The lack of country music was a bit shocking to me originally, but I guess I'm glad I didn't end up in Queensland ultimately.
Yeah, no, very fair. And I mean, Dreadnought as a company, it's small cap, mining exploration in particular in rare earths. How did you get involved in Dreadnought Resources to begin with?
So I got tapped on the shoulder. I was an exploration manager for a few small companies. And when Paul Chapman and David Chapman were looking to float a new company, they were looking at rolling that into a shell called Tychean, which had Ian Gordon and Paul Payne on there. And they wanted someone young and dumb to come on board and really drive the exploration side of things to create a discovery-focused company. And because one of our main assets was up in the Kimberley, it was also had to be a company that was focused on stakeholder engagement, good community relations, things that get sort of flogged as ESG these days, but it's actually doing the right thing by your neighbors and abiding by the rules and regulations. So it was something that I always had a strong belief in and always developed strong relationships with stakeholders. And so it was a natural opportunity to open up working in that area and really start to build a fantastic team and with a great board and good assets and good projects.
And I mean, for you personally, I can imagine you still want to get out in the field, but now being a managing director, it's a slightly different role. How have you adjusted to that side of things, like progressing through almost the hierarchy of mining exploration to now being where you are today, and being involved in Dreadnought Resources? How has that all sort of expanded and changed over the years.
Well, I certainly never thought I'd be having a podcast at the moment, but
Yeah.
being on site's still my happy place. I'm actually heading up on Friday. Elon Musk, love him or hate him for his recent comments on rare earths, Starlink, and a lot of that work and technology has really been an enabler for us to work out bush. So I'll be able to head out bush next week. We have 3 Starlink satellites spread across our projects, and we actually get faster internet out there than we do here. So that allows me to go outside still into my happy place while still doing all the work required of an MD.
Yeah, the Starlink, I mean, that's a little segue there. That is rolling out quickly in Australia, and that's an incredible thing in regards to connectivity and extremely quick internet across the country.
Absolute game changer. If you're not on it, get on it.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I've been looking at it myself, but I mean, diving more into Dreadnought and the company mission, you've got a handful of projects, and again, this year you've done a capital raise and you're well funded, but I mean, how did that company start and the story behind its now process investigating rare earth materials and a few others in the commodity sector?
Exploration is a fantastic game. And I think most people view it as sort of the early stages of a mining company where you have an asset. So if you're a gold explorer, you get exposure to gold upside. But in reality, if you're an explorer, you're not an early stage mining company. You're actually an R&D company. You're like a tech start. Picked up Mark Randolph's book on the start of Netflix a year or two ago and flipping through that for no reason, aside from I like reading. And I'd completely blown away by the similarities between tech startup companies and exploration companies. And I think it's a very different mindset that people need to get across. When it comes to exploration, you have nothing. Until you have something, you don't actually have any value. And so you have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to be flexible. And when you actually have exploration tenements, especially early stage ones like we do, where there's nothing on them, then they're actually liabilities. They're not assets. And it's our job to research that ground, acquire good ground that has the opportunity, and quickly churn through that and pivot. So for example, Mangaroon, we pegged that ground for nickel and gold. And then once we did the deal on the nickel quite quickly, we looked around us. We knew we had prospective terrain. We saw the Hastings ground next door. We broke that down to what matters and what can be mapped. That's the key components of exploration, and quickly identified, rare earth ironstone sticking out of the ground, and that's evolved extremely quickly. So it's that ability to pivot, go into areas eyes wide open, and look for opportunities in areas that have the potential to have good mineralization in them.
And I mean, the rare earths, we were talking before starting, it's a flavor of the month in a way. It's now this really interesting commodity that everyone wants, and I see it as it's an umbrella term because there's clearly a lot more involved in the rare earths. Can you shed a bit more light into what that even term means? Because I think it's a very easy way to just encapsulate all these incredible commodities that are required for so many aspects of everyday life, but it's just the umbrella term of rare earths.
That's right. So it's rare earths it's 14 to 17 elements depending how you sort of abide by things or what trio proportions people want to use. And I think that makes it a very dangerous thing, especially for the general market punter or an investor in exploration or mining stocks in the rare earths, in that it's almost like saying you have ferrous sulfides. Like you have a massive sulfide deposit. Your copper, your lead, your zinc, and your iron are all worth extremely different amounts of money. And for a massive sulfide deposit in particular, you'd actually get no value for your iron. So when you look at rare earths, you have 14, 17 elements in there. And you look at, no one would ever report total ferrous metals in a massive sulfide deposit. But when you look at rare earths, you get trio, total rare earth oxides. You combine those 17 elements, plus or minus scandium and yttrium, and you get things that range in value from $1 a kilo to $1,500 a kilo. And when you break that down even further and actually look at what is in demand and what things are being paid for in the current market, there's only 4 elements of interest. That's neodymium and praseodymium, or the light rare earths, or the 2 light rare earths that matter, and dysprosium, terbium, the 2 heavy rare earths that matter. The rest of the elements are in constant oversupply, and this is an important part about rare earths. When you look at, I think right now, there's about 179,000 tons of total rare earth demand in 2023, and that's going to expand up to 240,000 tons in 2030. Break that down by the actual demand per element. Neodymium and praseodymium makes up 42% of that demand, and dysprosium terbium 2. And when you get to 2030, it's 50% of that demand is going to be neodymium, praseodymium, and 2% dysprosium, terbium still. But most rare earth deposits occur with only 15 to 25% neodymium, praseodymium, which means in order to meet the demand for neodymium, praseodymium, all of the other rare earths are going to be in massive oversupply, and you're not going to get paid for them.
And I mean, that was the point that I realized. There's been a lot of noise. I mean, we talked about Tesla earlier, but Tesla came out and said that they were going to potentially look at using other resources to create their batteries. But the underlying statement in regards to that is because primarily demand comes from certain countries, and China's one of the biggest ones, and there's this real hesitancy almost to seek supply from them. And I mean, the stats that I saw, it was about 80% of rare earth commodities come out of China. I'm not sure if that's changing. Don't quote me on that one. But it sort of opens up the opportunities in particular for Australia as a huge opportunity to find these resources, which is easier said than done. But this opportunity to then supply this ever-growing demand into the market. And if those stats are anything to go by, and we all know how important these commodities are and how there's a overlooming lack of supply, then it is really an awesome spot to be an Australian explorer. But when we're thinking about these materials, and it might not be necessarily what Dreadnought focuses on, but for listeners that need to understand where these resources are used, where is it impacted on everyday life?
That's a pretty loaded question there. There's a lot going on. If we take a step back and what's really driving it, that is the EV revolution. Has become a low carbon environment. You have to generate electricity using mechanical means like wind turbines. And that requires a magnet to then convert that into electrical energy. And then the other end of that, you have to convert electrical energy into mechanical energy, which is the EV motors. And when you look at the rare earth magnets, the consumption from those two things is going to be astronomical. But the rare earth magnets are used, there's dozens of magnets in a rare earth car, in any car. So you have an internal combustion engine car, and you have automatic windows, you have automatic seats, you have anything like that that has an electric motor, there's a rare earth magnet in there. When you look at, Elon Musk and the Tesla talk recently, they talked about removing rare earths from the powertrain, not the rest of the car, just the powertrain. They also went on in the same conversation and talked about robotics. And in order to have a robot moving fingers and moving around is going to take astronomically amounts of rare earth magnets in there to actually make that happen. And so anything that requires an electric motor is going to have a lot of rare earth magnets. And this is where there's a very long disconnect between mining and exploration, what we're doing, the supply of the raw materials for rare earths, and the ultimate end need, which is the critical component, which is the rare earth magnet. Thomas Krumer were at the Singapore Future Facing Metals Conference last week in Singapore, and Thomas Krumer, the Rare Earth Observer, fantastic. If you're interested, get on his blog. It's a fantastic source of information, and he made a good point about the geopolitical underpinning and the EV transition we just talked about, and that is the world has two options. We can either try and secure our own supply chains and position China in a corner and develop our own supply chains, or we can go carbon neutral by 2050. And that's because of this entire middle ground of midstream and downstream processing to get from the ground to the magnets. And so when you look at the mining side of it, set aside geopolitics for now, look at the mining. So we find rare earths in the ground. Lots of people are exploring for rare earths in the ground. First step there is then to produce a concentrate. So prove up the resource. Can you produce a concentrate that can then be processed? From that point on, once you do that flotation and produce a con, it goes into a chemical industry. It's not a mining industry anymore. It's this whole other world. And not many other commodities have this midstream, downstream complexity that rare earths have. Like pretty much no other commodity does. And so once you have the concentrate, you then have to create a mixed rare earth carbonate. You then have to create a rare earth oxide. You then have to create rare earth metals and alloys. And then from those do you get the magnets. And then once you get the magnets, do they then go into the turbines and the cars and the jet fighters and the robots and everything else? And so that's where the world has started to discover a lot more rare earth deposits, and we can start producing more concentrates. But in order for the world to have an ex-China supply chain to magnets, they would have to create all of that midstream and downstream processing. Because at the moment, nearly all of that is done in China, very little bit in Japan, and even less in Europe.
And I mean, that's the key there is it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think there's this, as you said, this disconnect between reality of we want all these incredible technologies and this net zero and these incredible cars and robots, but there's been no real development in mines and even exploration. And there's this sudden tick up because the pennies dropped, for example, that we don't actually have the supply, we don't have the resources, we don't have any of the manufacturing necessarily set up to refine the key components of all these technologies. And there's almost this tailwind now, which I think is incredible, that it's now refocusing back to, if we want to go down this path of EVs, and you've got to get back into the ground, got to get back into finding these resources. So with Dreadnought positioned as it is now, you've got a handful of projects. What's so exciting about the projects that you've got going on at the moment?
I think the most exciting things about our rare earth project in particular is, one, we're next door to a mine going into development. So a lot of rare earth deposits out there are going to really struggle to get to that first stage of being able to produce a concentrate, get it out of the ground because the grades are too low, or produce a concentrate because the mineralogy is incorrect. So if you are looking at companies, make sure you actually look at grades and actually look at mineralogy. Secondly, when you look at Dreadnought's mineralogy, we have the right monazite, especially in the near surface, and that has extremely high neodymium praseodymium. So we went back to, if you were to produce an ideal concentrate, it would have 40 to 50% neodymium praseodymium and 2% dysprosium terbium. And most of the world has 15 to 24. Whereas the monazite concentrate that being produced out of the Skifford Creek ferrocarbonatite complex, which is Hastings next door, and us and lanthanide next door to that as well, ours is actually running between 30 and 47%. I think up to 52% for Simon's Find. And that's actually a really, really attractive concentrate to actually go onto the market. And when you look at what's evolving around us, yes, there's going to be a lot of headwinds for that midstream, downstream processing if we're going to ex-China. But you have this massive government intervention, which is something you don't generally see in a lot of commodities or in the resource space. And I always think back to America. We invaded all these countries to get sources of oil and gas, and we're net importers and all the rest of it. And then as soon as America decided it wanted to be a net exporter of oil and gas, within 2 years it was. It's when you mobilize, especially countries like America, they can do things like that. It's amazing what will develop. So already you see energy fuels becoming importer of concentrates, monazites to produce rare earths. You have facilities being built in China. You have processing facilities being built in Texas. You have a magnet facility being built in Texas. And yes, a lot of these initially are going to have really small inputs, but it's going to grow, and it's going to grow very rapidly.
So then for as we said, it's almost this small fish in a really, really big and emerging pond. And I can imagine that the government support and encouragement, there's 100% going to be roadblocks and barriers. And we all know that mining now has this looming ESG component or across any industry, and that you have to do things the right way. And it's, in a way, you'd say mining and ESG aren't necessarily going to be hand in hand in just the premise of what it stands for, but you can still operate within those right structures. So moving forward for Dreadnought, with the projects that you've got, what are the timelines or objectives to get accomplished now that, as we said, you've done the raise, you've got some money in the bank, you can start getting back in and really executing some of the game plan and objectives for the company? What are some of those?
Yeah. So for our Kimberley project, where we made a copper discovery, copper, cobalt, silver, gold in 2020, we'll be continuing to advance that project this year. So we will be seeing, is there scale in that project? If we can see scale, like an Avanco style opportunity, then we'll test the MET. We'll make sure we can produce a product, and then next year get up there and start resource drilling and start that study work. For our Kimberley project, for our Mangaroon nickel, we have the First Quantum. We'll be drilling some more targets there. It's about discovery. For our gold at Mangaroon, our high-grade gold, the Star of Mangaroon, one of the reasons why first place, we'll be doing some discovery drilling out there. And then Central Yilgarn, nickel and gold, also discovery drilling. So the rare earths are quite more advanced. So we have the discovery and our first resource on the rare earths. Kimberley is got a discovery, need to make a couple more and deliver resources on that. So the bulk of our funding, while we're doing that work in the background, is going to be on the rare earths. We put out our maiden resource, initial resource, just after Christmas, and we're out there right now with 3 rigs. I got 28-man camp built up on site, and we are exploring the rest of that area to see how much material we have. We're going to convert that to resource and start to underpin the study work. So we need to make some additional discoveries. We need to convert those to resource and then use that to underpin the economic studies. And those are what I think people are really waiting for. Part of that's the network and everything else that goes.
And I mean, already thinking from a person that's never really been involved in mining, I mean, there's got to be a lot of organization and I want to say stress as well in regards to making sure that you're optimizing your time, your resources, people on certain sites. And that's before even thinking about, again, engagement with local communities, working with the government, working with just even local councils or groups out there. I mean, from your point of view now, being in a position where that's really, you're the head honcho, that's part of your goal. How do you manage all that? And what are some of the insights in regards that you've learned, at least being in that position instead of being out and I mean, you'd still like to be out in the ground, but you've got a lot more responsibility from that point of view.
That's right. It's get started early. So we have a saying here within Dreadnought, plan for success, budget for failure. So any hole could be the next discovery hole, but chances are it's not. So, but we always want it to be. And so before we even drill a hole into the ground, we have environmental surveys underway. We have our engagement with our native title crews before we step foot on the ground in the first place. We always have our heritage surveys in place. I'm actually going up on Friday to do that heritage survey. I view it as if the elders are going to be there, especially main elders, they're the CEOs, MDs, chairmen of their organizations, and so I'm there to meet with them and make sure everything's going okay. So we've had, this will be our 4th or 5th heritage survey. I've been on all but one. It's our pastoralists up there, relationships. So how do we handle it? Well, we've been doing it from day one. You know, it's not just exploration out there on the bush. All of our approvals, all of our relationships, all of our surveys, whether it's environmental, radiation, whether it's, we have styglofauna surveys going on out there, the search for groundwater and all the rest of it. All these things that plan into what will eventually become, hopefully, what we're aiming for, a mine. We start doing that work from day one. And I think that probably helps that myself and quite a few of our team have come from BHP and Goldfields and a few other big companies. And so we know what's needed for that stage. And so we start doing that work very, very well.
So then can you talk a bit more about the team that you've got? And I mean, you were mentioning that you got approached to be originally in Dreadnought. Have you helped build this team yourself through your networks and connections? And who are some of the really important people in the team without, I guess you don't want to mention everyone, but the key important figures in the company?
Yeah. Look, nearly every single senior person in our team here at Dreadnought, I've known and worked with, or we've worked with each other for the last 6 to 10 plus years. So we've all worked together at different companies. So Matt Crow, our exploration manager, you always want to find someone in your career that the two of you combined is greater than the sum of your parts. So when Crow and I work together, we're very complementary skill sets. His strengths are my weaknesses, and vice versa. And together we've always dreamt building this company, and we've always been really involved with training the future geos. At BHP, we were the training group for all new geos. And so we got introduced to Nick Chapman, Sam Bussetti, Luke Blaze, Leah Dawson, all of them we've worked with, second or third company I worked together. So we knew when different people would come back into the team. We start off with, I was by myself, Nick Chapman was the first one in, Crow in, and then we built the rest of the team around that. So it's lots of complementary skill sets that love what we do and how we do.
And I mean, that's again, a testament to having the cohesion in a team almost, is that you all know each other. It's much easier to get things going and all be on the same page, but it's important that, people have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's a cliche that you want to team with people that have got skills that you don't. I think that's really important, and it's good to hear that. And I mean, now as you're in this new stage of the company, I mean, what do you see Dreadnought's mission without, going too far into the future? Because I think, as you said, you have to be nimble, you have to be within the moment, but of course there's a fair bit of planning that goes into the company and where to go next. So what is the potential, not end goal, but the future objectives to meet for the company?
Companies always like to talk about organic growth. And when I was at BHP, they talked about being diversified by commodity and geography. And for some reason, a lot of investors seem to want explorers to be focused on one particular thing. We talked earlier about when you're an explorer, you actually have nothing. So you have to be diversified. You have to be open. As Paul Chapman says, we're here to find metal, and weapons-grade metal is the best. So we will always be an exploration company. We'll always be an organic growth-focused company. what we have immediately in our sites. We need to continue to prove up the rare earths and prove the economics of that opportunity and get that into production to produce a concentrate. So if we can produce a concentrate, there's now a lot of options, especially by the time we get into production, be it Lynas, Iluka, Energy Fuels, Hastings next door to us. Who knows what else is going to be built in that time period to process monazite by the time we get a mine approved. There'll be options for that, and that requires a low capex and is focused on mining. Along the way, they might find a partner, be that a mining partner, a downstream or midstream processing partner to help us along the way, or there might be a regional consolidation. The area is absolutely ripe for it, and you see lots of people getting involved with that, and M&A activity right now is huge. We have Goldman Sachs appointed with Dreadnought at the moment on no retainer, and they're in there for the defense in case something does try to take advantage of us before we get full realized value. For the rest of the assets, it has continued to develop this.
And I mean, there's a few points there. I mean, particularly the M&A activity, you can just see it's almost like the hawks are in the air in a way, looking down on these areas that have such a benefit, such a wealth of potential future. But it's now like, can they get there, and if they've got the resources, because you can see that from a big company point of view, it's just such a fantastic ability to swoop in, take something when it's on its knees and turn it into a really, really profitable utility or company or commodity or mine. But I mean, I wanted to touch back there about the companies and the areas that you're in. I mean, it sounds like it's almost been hidden in plain sight, for a funnier term, that all these overlaying areas, it's more about the time and almost going back to these sites that have been potentially neglected, or, as you said, people have gone in with the intention of looking for something. Because they haven't found what they've looked for, they've neglected everything else in that area, which you can see it now across the industry in all factors, that all these mining exploration companies are revisiting old sites, or not even old, just yet not visited sites, and going back with a fresh set of eyes. I mean, within that area, it seems to be quite rich in rare earth and resources. I mean, is there been historical evidence to suggest this, or have you done a lot of research on yourself? And then the second part, which I think is really interesting, is you've got these blocks of land. How do the companies almost coexist or collaborate, or even help each other out, being in such a localized area?
Some good questions there again. Quite a loaded statement. So I guess when it comes to project generation, like that's really the heart and soul of what we do at Dreadnought, and the ability to actually assess that ground. You get a lot of real estate companies out there that'll peg ground and sit on it and hope for a neurology play like Dreadnought to come along. But when we look at ground, one of the greatest things, the most important things we look at is how unloved it is. Most people will say brownfields is the way to go, shadow of the head frame. But when you look at the biggest discoveries over the last 10, 15 years, your Julimars, your Hemis, your Lion Towns, your Nova Bollingers, your the list goes on and on, your Gruyères and Tropicanas, none of them were anywhere near head frame. So the lack of mineralization in an area that geologically should be mineralized is the most prospective thing. And it's also the hardest thing to convince people to get you funding for. And so it's about a balanced approach to pegging that ground and going after low-hanging fruit and being able to build on. So people have acquired old mines and then turned them into new mines, and that's a tried and proven exploration thing. It's worked for a lot of companies. I believe Resolute is one of the best ones at that. But when you look at exploration, when we look at that mining side, greatest risk an exploration company has is when they go into mining. It's the number one way a mining company, junior explorer, fails. Whereas when you go for a greenfields project and you have a big tract of land and you're looking for discoveries, you're not gonna fail. You're not gonna fall over. You might get beat, might get a black eye, but you'll be able to dust yourself off and keep going. So greenfields exploration, they call it high risk, high reward. It is extremely high reward, but it's not as high risk, I think, as people make it out to be. When you look at the collaboration aspect to your question, we're actually working with ANU at the moment to build an ARC collaborative project. We're presenting to the government, and we work quite closely on the ground. We have Hastings in there, I believe Kingfisher's in there, Lanthanide's in there, and that's also brought in the GSWA, it's brought in UWA, and so it's a very collaborative. There's a lot to learn. We all have our talents. There's no one's going to come and claim jump us when we're next door to each other. And so the more that we can learn together, the greater benefit we have for that region, because that region really needs and really wants development. And there's a lot of economic opportunity if we can actually make the Gascoyne critical metal Pilbara of Western Australia. A huge opportunity for the state, a huge opportunity for the region, and it's a fantastic opportunity. And so far we've seen a lot of support from our native title groups and the pastoralists out there in order to do things properly, actually develop that area and create jobs and infrastructure.
And then, I mean, that was the last point, which, the actually surveying and analysing the ground. I mean, I know there's a whole host of techniques and there's a whole host of new ones that are coming out. Have you found that that's had an instrumental impact on analysing and realising what is actually in that area as well? Or has there been all this information that, again, some companies, they just look at it and go, geez, this has been missed. How did this get missed? And it's more a reflection of, it was back then, no one really cared about that sort of commodity. And now it's like, wow, they've just missed a gold mine because it was 20 years ago.
I believe early stage exploration, one of my greatest obsessions is sample spacing and significance. Everyone sees good drill intercepts. Everyone knows a good gold drill intercept. And so when you look at something that's, that's 10 grams per ton or 1 gram per ton, 100 grams per ton, your definition of good is, when you go back to early stage exploration, not only are you working with something that's nowhere near mineralized grade, it also depends on the sampling technique that you used and how close you are, how distant you are to what you're looking for. And so getting excited about a 1 to 5 ppb gold stream sediment is something that can be quite difficult. There was a book published recently on Argyle. I believe it's actually called Argyle. And the first 14 chapters of that book, I think, is the most publicly as accessible explanation of early stage exploration. I think anyone can pick up those first 14 chapters with no technical background and really start to understand the significance of finding 1 pyrite garnet in a massive drainage basin. And explains how significant that is and what it leads to. We can all appreciate that in hindsight with the Argyle discovery. So when you're doing the early stage exploration for us, there's been massive technological advancement. We look at yin. So we found yin by reprocessing the government data. So that was 500-meter north-south data flown in the 1990s. So when you look at data like that, you reprocess that. We're looking for a thorn, but you have to go into that realizing that it's either a positive or a null. There's a lot of null that people don't appreciate in exploration. John Hronsky prattles on about this a lot in a lot of his exploration management courses. And null is extremely important because it doesn't mean negative. And so when you have the 500-meter data, we got a thorium anomaly. Fantastic. Let's go out and kick it and see what's there. All right, well, that's not all of it. We then go out and fly 50, 100-meter spaced magnetic radiometric data, highlighted a bunch more. But even then, the frequency rate, I think it's 30 hertz or whatever it is for radiometric data. I may have that wrong. But anyway, when you're flying at the rate the plane is flying, the fixed wing aircraft is flying ground, the frequency that it takes a radiometric sample is about a 30-meter bit of ground, which means it's averaging the thorium content over 30 meters of ground. So if you're looking for a 10-meter ironstone sticking out of the ground, it's going to be diluted down. So you might not even see it in that. So again, it's about what is the sample spacing of your stream seds, your soils, your drilling, your air core, your RC, everything. And what's significant? What are you actually trying to hit for further encouragement? And that's what we specialize, what we obsessed on and continue to obsess over here at Dreadnought. And I think that's what really helps us evaluate.
I mean, I can see it in your face as well. It is, it's your bread and butter. You're excited by this and all the potential future applications. But again, getting your hands in the dirt, starting from where you were to now, it's good to see that hasn't been lost on you just because you have to do more office work instead of being out there. So, I mean, for listeners that want to learn more about Dreadnought Resources and what you guys are looking to further accomplish, where can they go and how can they get more information?
Look, the website's a great place to go. It is fairly simple, but there's a lot of content on there linked to our announcements and linked to our media in the background. We do a lot of work with Canyons Purple and producing a lot of insights, information, and news that's going out there. We're being covered by Bell Potter and Canaccord at the moment. So Paul Howard over there at Canaccord's been covering us for a while. He provides some great insight. And we have a bit more coverage. And then we have a lot of videos on on YouTube. As much as I love being out in the field and feel weird being in front of a camera because I got a face for radio, it's, we do have lots of videos out there that people can watch and see our story. And one of the things that you'll notice as you go back in time is that we always try to be transparent. We always try to talk about what we're going to do and why. If we don't find something that we're looking for, we call it out. And if we do find something, we continue to advance that. We started off, went from 3 to 50 mil market cap on the back of the Metzke's gold discovery. We then hit 100 on the back of the Orion discovery, and now we're almost valued completely on the copper. So we change over time. And you see that most discoveries are made looking for something else. And it's a matter of getting out there looking and your eyes wide open.
No, I love it. And I encourage people to go and look more if they're interested. And of course, I'm sure people can send emails or ask questions on the website. But yeah, thank you, Dean, for taking the time to speak with me today, and wish you all the best with Dreadnought's next 6 to 12 months and hopefully touch base again in the future and see how it's all progressing.
Too easy. Cheers, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.